France's rejection of the newly issued passports from the Alliance of Sahel States, a regional coalition between Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, has sparked an intense wave of debate, not just within West Africa, but across the international community. At the heart of this dispute lies a far greater question than travel documents or border controls. It is about sovereignty, legitimacy, and the ability of African nations to redefine their political and economic destinies in the face of external pressures. This controversy reflects centuries of contested authority between France and its former colonies, and now the decision to block recognition of the new AES passports threatens to escalate tensions into a diplomatic confrontation with consequences that stretch well beyond the Sahel. The creation of these passports was not a mere bureaucratic move. It symbolized a declaration of independence, an assertion that Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, nations bound together by shared struggles against insurgency, sanctions, and external interference, are carving out a new identity under the banner of the Alliance of Sahel States. For citizens of these countries, the passports represent a tangible emblem of unity, pride, and resistance against a legacy of neo-colonial influence. But France's rejection of the documents sends a stark message. The West is not prepared to accept such transformations without a fight. When France announced that the new AES passports would not be accepted at its borders, many interpreted it not as a technical or legal decision, but as a political one. After all, France continues to wield significant influence in the region, from military operations to economic interests, and the rise of the AES is perceived as a direct challenge to that dominance. By refusing to recognize the passports, Paris effectively questioned the legitimacy of the alliance itself. This act adds a new layer of strain to already deteriorating relations, considering that Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso had previously expelled French forces and accused Paris of meddling in their internal affairs. The implications for ordinary citizens are profound. Students, workers, and families from these countries who rely on international travel, many of whom maintain deep connections to France due to decades of migration and cultural exchange, suddenly find themselves caught in a limbo. The rejection of passports translates into restrictions on movement, job opportunities, and educational prospects, compounding the sense of injustice among populations already struggling with economic challenges. In turn, resentment deepens against France, fueling the perception that the West is intent on punishing African nations for daring to pursue independence on their own terms. At the same time, this controversy resonates deeply within the halls of global diplomacy. The refusal to accept AES passports creates a precedent, as it raises the question of how other nations will respond. Will European Union countries follow France's lead, thereby isolating AES citizens across the continent? Or will some states break with Paris, acknowledging the alliance's legitimacy as a political necessity? Russia, China, Turkey, and other rising powers have already signaled greater engagement with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. For them, recognizing the AES passports could become a low-cost yet highly symbolic way of cementing alliances and showcasing opposition to Western hegemony. In such a context, the rejection of these passports may push the Sahel nations further into the arms of alternative global partners. The roots of this dispute go back to the deeper history of Franco-African relations. France's colonial empire in West Africa did not vanish overnight when independence was declared in the 1960s. Instead, it transformed into a system of dependency, where economic ties, military agreements, and cultural dominance maintained Paris's leverage. For decades, France provided security assistance, trained military forces, and facilitated financial arrangements, while African countries remained heavily reliant on French markets and institutions. But the rise of insurgencies, accusations, of French exploitation of natural resources and the broader global shift toward multipolarity gradually eroded patience within these nations. The formation of the AES is the culmination of this long history of frustration, where new leaders are signaling that the era of dependency must come to an end. France's rejection of AES passports is therefore seen not as a mere refusal of a document, but as a refusal to acknowledge this new reality. To the AES governments, the move is a direct insult, an attempt to delegitimize their sovereignty in front of the world. Public statements from Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou reflect this anger, emphasizing that the passports are valid under their constitutions and that France's refusal exposes the hypocrisy of a nation that preaches democracy abroad while denying the self-determination of others. The symbolism is potent. A citizen carrying an AES passport may be free to travel across much of Africa, yet blocked at the gates of France, the very power whose colonial rule shaped the modern borders of the Sahel. The geopolitical stakes cannot be overstated. France's position risks accelerating the very outcome it seeks to avoid, the deepening of AES unity and the strengthening of anti-French sentiment. Already, young populations across Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have rallied behind the idea of the AES as a vehicle for collective dignity. Demonstrations, cultural expressions, and political speeches increasingly portray France as the antagonist, an obstacle to true independence. The rejection of passports plays directly into this narrative, allowing AES leaders to consolidate domestic support by presenting themselves as defenders of sovereignty, standing firm against foreign oppression. Meanwhile, within France itself, the decision has sparked debates about the long-term wisdom of alienating these nations. Critics argue that by rejecting the passports, Paris is closing doors at a time when cooperation is still needed to address regional security threats, migration flows, and economic partnerships. Others believe the move was necessary to assert legal and political clarity, refusing to normalize a bloc that is perceived as hostile to French interests. What is clear, however, is that the decision is reshaping perceptions of France in Africa, reinforcing the sense that Paris is unwilling to accept Africa as an equal partner. For the global community, the AES passport issue represents more than a regional quarrel. It is a symbol of the shifting world order, where former colonies no longer accept the frameworks imposed by their ex-colonizers. Just as debates over currency, resource ownership, and military alliances have exposed the cracks in old systems of control, the question of who gets to define legitimate identity documents has become a new battleground. The simple act of rejecting a passport has transformed into a geopolitical statement about power, influence, and the right of nations to redefine themselves without foreign approval. Looking forward, the trajectory of this crisis will depend on how each side maneuvers. If France doubles down, enforcing the rejection and rallying European partners to its position, the AES could escalate the confrontation by restricting French access to its markets or resources. Alternatively, if external powers like Russia, China, or members of the BRICS move quickly to embrace AES documentation, France's position may look increasingly isolated. In either case, the people of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso will remain central to the outcome, for their support of the AES project is what gives it legitimacy. The passports, after all, are not just travel documents. They are political declarations of independence, carried in the hands of citizens who believe that Africa's future belongs to Africans. What emerges from this controversy is a profound reminder that sovereignty is not just about borders or military power, but also about the symbols that define national identity. By rejecting AES passports, France has reignited old debates about colonial legacies, global hierarchies, and the future of African integration. For Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, the struggle is far from over. But one thing is certain, The era when France could unilaterally define the legitimacy of African institutions is drawing to a close, replaced by a new era of contested power in which Africa itself will increasingly determine its own path regardless of who chooses to recognize it.